Keynote is Steve Jones. I guess he's Dr. Stephen Jones. He's a tall guy from California who did his PhD in genetics, and he's a wheat breeder, and he's a guy who likes to be out in the field when it's dawn or before dawn. He's most recently extremely well-known, famous, because he founded the bread lab out in the Skagit Valley, which, for those of you who don't know, as I didn't, I used to call it the Skagit Valley. The Skagit Valley is the first sort of agricultural valley south of the border between Canada and the States, sort of south of Vancouver. So you're well north of Seattle. And Steve basically came to the agricultural research station out there and started to make a revolution, which involved his ag students, wonderful people. Most of them are tall. I don't know whether it's Steve's, prejudice or whatever, but they're all kind of long people and all fabulous, working with, breeding barley or working with perennial wheats, but also working with local farmers, saying, well, okay, so the barley crop is uncertain this year because there was too much rain. How can we have a small-scale brewery buy this barley anyway for brewing, because instead of dealing with large industrial production of grains, let's look at the local grain economy and see how we can make it work. So with his students and with millers and bakers and the odd sort of stray cookbook author like me and oven builders and brewers and scientists, Steve has created this bread lab environment where we all come together to try and see about the way of the future for local grain economies that is not about the race to the bottom for the cheapest, worst tasting grain, but instead a sustainable future for grain growers and grain eaters, which we know is all of us. Thanks, Steve. Come talk to us.
Okay. Thank you, Naomi. Thank you to all the organizers that invited me. It's an honor to be here, and thank you all for lasting this long through the day. I am gonna summarize. I'm gonna put things in context. I'm gonna jump in and out of the 3 days that we spent here. I'm gonna use the word beauty. I'm gonna talk about art, and I'm gonna use the word beauty again. So you'll probably get tired of hearing that. Andrew Ross spoke yesterday on flour milling, and others did. In the U.S., about 120 years ago, we lost 25,000 flour mills. Today, there are less than 200. Okay, that's just a fact. I'm just starting with a fact and a beautiful painting by Cézanne there of a millstone in the park at Chateau Noir. That's in Philadelphia. And on the left is a millstone cast away from an old tidal mill from the 1880s that's about 20 minutes from my office. And the similarity is pretty striking. Of the 25,000 mills that were lost, a few were saved. This is in a city park on Cape Cod. Okay, so I want to talk about paths forward. I want to talk about wheat breeding. I want to talk about white bread. I'll say right now, we don't do white bread. I want to bring in seeds and community as well. And I'll go through pretty quickly. I have a lot of images. I'll give a background on our program. I was the 5th wheat breeder hired at Washington State University. This is the first in 1894. So the first wheat breeder was hired in 1894. I was the 5th. That makes me feel either very young or very old. I'm not sure which. This is William Jasper Spillman. He wrote a book. He coined the term the Law of Diminishing Returns. So this is a person that's in my intellectual pedigree at the university. This is a book that if you haven't read or it's a concept that you're not up on, it's pretty timely information right now. Below the soil, F equals fertilizer, above the soil equals $signs. So what he showed is that he wrote this book because people were promoting fertilizer. This was in the 20s. How much fertilizer should I put on as a farmer? The answer was, how much can you afford? That's not a good answer, right? And he showed that at a certain point there were diminishing returns, and he came up with that. And it's a powerful legacy for me to have in my pedigree. I'm a public servant. And I don't use that word lightly, I use it in a very serious way. So as a public servant, and Naomi mentioned how beautiful it is, this to the left up here is, that's Canada, that's Mount Baker, that's the Nooksack River. This is about 20 minutes from my office. This is where I work. The average farm size here is 100 acres. The average farm size in the US is 1,000. The average farm size for wheat growers can be up in the 10,000s. So what is my job? What is my role as a public servant? How can I help my community? The first one is to breed freely available new non-commodity wheat and buckwheat for out-of-place locations and make existing varieties better. The important word there is freely available. We don't do GMO and we don't lock up what we do through intellectual property. What we do is the same thing that William Jasper Spillman began in 1894. He made his first cross in 1898. In 1905, he released his first variety. That was given freely to the farmers. We continue that today. That's rare in my system. We look at flavor and nutrition, and it only took my program 110 years to get around to that. So for the first 110 years of this program, they didn't give jack about nutrition or flavor. It didn't matter. And it doesn't matter in a commodity system. It does matter to us. And it does matter to a lot of people. But in a big commodity system like wheat, there's no room for flavor and nutrition. It doesn't matter. We're going to add helpers, we're going to add flavor, we're going to do whatever. But it really doesn't matter. We favor that it does matter, and I'll get into why that's important in a bit too. We also keep value within the community where it's produced. If you look at wheat and you look at the rapid centralization of it, if we went from 25,000 flour mills to less than 200, what that meant is the big claw, the big commodity claw goes into a state, pulls out the wheat. Let's say Kansas goes in there, takes the wheat, sends it to Minneapolis, it's turned into flour, it's trucked back to Kansas and resold to the farmers that grew the wheat as flour. The value is not added in growing it, the value is added in milling it, or malting it, or brewing it, or distilling it, or baking it. That's where the value is added. We favor a model that does it there. In our valley, if we grow the wheat, we're going to mill it there, we're going to bake it there. If we grow barley, we're going to malt it there, we're going to brew it there, we're going to still it there. That each one of those clicks is economic value, is living wage jobs. As a biologist, I talk much more about economics than I do about biology nowadays. Talk about jobs. We talk about that click. We work directly with farmers. This is Anna Martin. She's in that valley that I just showed on the previous slide. We involve folks like Anna. We also involve millers, maltsters, chefs, bakers, brewers, the mayor, community members, people that run food banks, people that run the library and the school, to help inform us as scientists, as public scientists, what do we want to do, right? What do we want to do for our community? We need help with that. We need help from you to tell us what should wheat look like? What should buckwheat look like? What should it taste like? As plant breeders, we work with diversity. We work with wall-to-wall diversity. We need variation. We heard about variation this morning in Asaf's talk. This is an example. There's only probably 200 different barleys in that field. These strips of wheat right here, there's tens of thousands of different wheats. We don't lack for variation. We look at least 40,000 different wheats per year, and we throw away at least 39,000 of them. Dr. Bethany Econopoli just graduated from my program with her PhD. She's looking at that same field a little later in the season, and plant breeding is very simple. She wants that one, she doesn't want that one, it's too late, that one's too tall and it's falling over. However it works. Plant breeding is very simple. And we had a question this morning on how did the early plant breeders work, so the idea that the myth of you saved your best seed. Farmers worked with populations, not with individual plants. They harvested it all and they saved some seed. They were building populations, they weren't building individual plants, if that makes sense. Right? So they would gather all their harvest and they would retain some. What did best would be overrepresented in that population and planted back the next year. So it's not a myth that that's how plant breeding worked. There's 55 million acres of wheat in the United States. It all looks like that. 55 million acres of that. It's basically the same. It's true here in the UK. It's true in Europe. It's even more extreme in Europe, actually, than on the continent than it is in the States. There's 0 acres of these. Actually, there's a couple hundred because they're in our farms, right? But that's what wheat looks like. It's not an exaggeration to say it's all the same. If it's hard and red, it's for bread. It's going to make a Big Mac bun or something like that. If it's soft and white, it's going to make a Twinkie or a chocolate chip cookie. That's how constricted the commodity system is. That's variation. That's what we deal with. We heard this morning about wild wheats. These are wild wheats. These are wild wheats crossed into our domestic wheats. The results are something like this. That's a soft white. That's a hard red. That's all of the 55 million acres of the states. It either looks like that or that. There's no button for blue. There's no button for a mahogany or Cabernet style color. This is what we work with. So we work outside of the commodity system. How do these taste? They're delicious. And I'll get to that in just a second. You're going to hear the word delicious too. So that's about 200 wheats. You can see the variation exhibited here as well, white, red. There's about 1,500 wheats in this room on that wall. We couldn't back up far enough to get them all. On this wall represents variation that we work with in our program every day. We have wheats from as early as the 1500s that were grown here in the UK to thatch roofs. So they're about 2.5 meters tall. They're incredibly beautiful. The early farmers selected on beauty, right? There's this, we want to walk away and say they didn't select on flavor and beauty and things like that. They did. We have beautiful crops because farmers before us selected on beauty. And the plants, the wheats that we have from the 1500s are absolutely gorgeous. We have plants from the 1500s up until ones that we developed last year. We have them from 120 different countries too. Again, that's how breeding works, and that's something we've been talking about here in the past 3 days too, is the importance of variation and diversity in our lives and in our food, for sure. How do these taste? We don't know. It's difficult for us to taste thousands of lines. We can taste hundreds easily. What I can say is that variation that I showed in those fields, that if we're looking at 40,000 different wheats, everything you as a chef or baker would want is in there. Any nuance, any novelty, anything is there. You just have to go find it. And that's the difficult part of any of this, really. I have just a few shots here of buckwheat. We had a talk on buckwheat yesterday, and there have been a few discussions on buckwheat. We absolutely love buckwheat as a crop. It's a neglected crop. There's very little research on it. The acreage is next to zero in most parts of the world. It was considered an emergency crop. It was considered, as we heard yesterday, a poor person's crop. That's true. It was considered a catch crop. I'm half Polish. When crops failed in Poland, they'd go right to the buckwheat. They still do because it's something you plant late and you can get something out of it, right? It has a bit of a stigma that way. It's incredible food. This is from our breeding program. This is a field shot of buckwheat. This is a greenhouse. This is a buckwheat from Bhutan that's about 5 meters tall in the greenhouse. Anything we do, we involve not just the farmers, but chefs, bakers, brewers, maltsters, millers, and on and on. This is Sonoko Sakai, cookbook writer, poet, just a beautiful person. She's a friend of the lab. Here she's doing soba demonstrations in the bread lab. The buckwheat that we work with, almost all of it is dehulled. So it's different than you have in Brittany, where you have the very gray small French style that's milled whole. We dehull it and then we get the groats and we do a very high-end soba, or we put the groats in breads and things like that. And I'll give an example of how we use them in cookies as well. This buckwheat here also is from Bhutan. It's over 2 meters tall. This one's 0.5 meter. That's variation. I'll just keep showing you the variation that we can deal with. You want a buckwheat this tall, we can do it. You want one that tall, we have it. Switch back to wheat now for a bit, and I'll get back to buckwheat in a second too. I want to talk about a grain of wheat and then what we do with it and the oddity of that. And to me, it just doesn't make sense what we do to that kernel. And I don't know if Andrew used the word brutalize in his title yesterday, but he had toil and a few other things. But I'm going to show you how we brutalize that kernel. That vessel, that little storage unit is incredibly nutrient dense. It lacks lysine. Otherwise, we could live on wheat, right? But it doesn't have enough lysine for us, and I'll tell you what we do about that in just a moment. But within that kernel is starch, of course, or various proteins, micronutrients, and I'll get into that, vitamins, phytochemicals, phenolics, antioxidants, fiber. That kernel is about 8% fiber. Depending on what variety it is, it can go up as high as 10 and maybe down to 7. But that's 8 to 10% fiber. Phytic acid, lipids. Phytic acid is good or bad depending what you do with it and depending what you say to good or bad. We cut that kernel in half now. This is the interior of it. The outside layer is here. That fluffy white stuff there has the same nutritional value basically as this cotton mat or a Q-tip. It's basically starch and protein. If that was our main calorie source, we'd get beriberi, right? A vitamin B1 deficiency. And people do get beriberi from white rice and white flour, right? We enrich it a little bit, but basically that's what we're going after when we mill. The word roller mill came up this morning, it came up yesterday, and it came up at least in 3 different talks that I was at. First of all, this is a stone mill here, gutted open. Ancient Greeks and Romans would recognize the cuts right there. I mean, those cuts have been around for 2,000, 5,000, I don't know how long they've been around, but at least 2,000 years, those basic cuts. In the late 1880s, we went to this, which is a roller mill. If this were a commercial roller mill, it'd be several stories tall. This fits on your desktop like a little Disneyland version of a roller mill. The wheat's gonna drop in here. You see the little bit, you see the fluting there, you see the little distance. There's no distance, basically no distance, then it's gonna go through sifters. This is what did away with 25,000 flour mills in the United States, the roller mill. This is the rapid, hyper, brutal centralization of our food system. And it was based on the roller mill. Here it is here. In one swipe, this will do this. It will take that inside, which is about 70%, and it'll basically throw out the front the 30%, which is the bran layer, the embryo and things like that. When I say 0 to 20 and 80 to 100, again, this is basically barren, right? It's starch and protein. Starch and proteins are great, but that's all that's in there is starch and protein. Everything on that list that we wanted is in here. This has 0 fiber. Okay, that has 0 fiber. Went from 8 to 10% to 0. This has up to 20% of some of those micronutrients. It has almost 0 of some of them, depending on what they are. It seems odd to me that we would harvest, let's say, 100 kilos of wheat, and we produce 70 kilos of food out of it. That's not the best use of our land, right? If we think of it that way, I think it really makes sense. So we're only using 70% of what we harvest out of that field of wheat. That's odd, and that's because of the roller mill. In my state of Washington, this brand goes, where do you think? So someone just shout out, where do you think that brand goes? Pigs, okay. No, it goes to peat pots for pot plants. So marijuana is legal in our state, and peat is very expensive. So instead of using peat for peat pots for pot plants to start them, they use bran. Okay, pot's great, all that's great, but is that the best use of our soil? Is to take the 30% that has everything that we want in it and make little peat pots for pot plants. That to me seems odd, that we're not even making food out of it. It's not even going to hogs, let's say. In the real old days, that just went down the river or the creek. Much of the bran just went off the sifters or the bolters right into the creek. What is in that bran and what has happened to our wheats over time? So we're not big fans of heritage or heirloom things. We love them, we love the tradition, but as breeders we want to make them better, right? We want to improve them. This is work that we did a while ago of historical versus modern wheats, and to see what happened to things like iron, zinc, and selenium. These are all very important micronutrients in our system. So what we know is that they went down, right? So selenium has gone down 50%, zinc is down 25%, iron's down at least 11, and these are averages. Within these, you have much greater variances there. So you'll see that the historical average is 35. The modern average that we got is 32. That's milligrams per kilo, and it went down 11%. So you could say, well, the older wheats were better because they just had more stuff. We've modified, we've changed wheat over time. The way we've changed it is as breeders, since the early 1900s, we've selected for very white wheat. We've selected for low ash, which means there's no iron or zinc in there. Where the skill of a modern miller is how barren you can make the flour, how white, brilliantly white you can make it. That also seems a little odd to us. Okay, so here's a number right there. What if we had selected for, and this is whole wheat, what if we had selected for iron? As I said, we have not. In my program, we did not for 120 years. Okay, that's a long time. What if we did? What if we just started now and said, can we develop wheats that have more iron or zinc in them? Yeah, right? We can get 3 times the iron without even hardly trying. Those colored wheats that I showed you, so this is work of Bridget Meintz and Colin Curran McAdams, 2 of my recent PhD students. This is unpublished results. Here's the average iron according to the USDA in our wheats. 55 million acres of it. It has about 32 milligrams per kilo. Okay, that purple one has 3 times that and twice the zinc. The barley, which I did not show, also has 3 times and twice the zinc. That's free, that's biologically significant, that's not related to yield. You're not going to take a yield cut by tripling the iron in our wheats. You just have to look for it, right? It's as simple as that. I almost said a bad word, but you just have to look for it. It's that simple, right? That's how breeding works. Who sets our target? Is our target white flour? Guess what? You're going to hit it. Is your target more iron and zinc? Guess what? You're going to hit that too. So it's very simple, right? And very powerful. That's how breeding works. This is Dr. Karen Hill. She's a former PhD student as well. So as plant breeders, we can make it work for the farmer, which we do. Now we need somewhere to test things. We can work with Dr. Ross down at Oregon State, or we can develop our own little craft bakery, and that's what we did. We wanted to develop a bakery where we can do things like this. We have a pizza oven with a 2-meter hearth in it. Here's where I'll now switch to deliciousness, and deliciousness matters. If we're going to develop wheats that are going to be used as 100% whole wheat, and I'll say the bread at our table today was delicious. It wasn't white. It had all kinds of stuff in it, right? That's obvious. You see there's little blue flecks in here. This is that blue wheat that has 3 times the iron in it. That's quite delicious, right? I don't know if that comes across in the image, but it really is. Where does that come from? That comes from variation. That comes from, like we heard Asaf talking this morning. Here's a wild wheat. Here it is. We named a new species after it. That's the first time that's ever been done, that a wheat breeding program is named a new species. That's that blue wheat right there. That has 3 times the iron, and it's incredibly delicious. And you saw the open crumb in that pizza dough. It's not that tough, right? You just have to want to do it. When we run into bakers that say you can't make good things out of 100% whole wheat, the first thing we do is go to a new baker. We have no patience or time or tolerance for people that just say no. We go till we get yes. And I'll show you some examples of yes. Here's one right here. So this is Fata Ahmad here. She's a PhD student from Pakistan. This is Mel Derbyshire. She's the head baker at Grand Central Baking in Portland and Seattle. Mel started 20 years ago as a dishwasher. Did not know how to bake. So 20 years ago, she was a dishwasher. Today, she's in charge of 84 bakers, and they make 11 million pieces of bread per year. That's Mel. Fata Ahmad came to our lab to work on cookies as a very efficient nutritional delivery system for Pakistan. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is take all the crap out of the cookies, right? Take the crap out, put good stuff back in, and make it delicious. How do we do that? Do we work with food scientists? No. We work with chefs and bakers. Right? We work with people that understand deliciousness and want to go right to it, right? It's not to say we don't appreciate the science, it's not to say we don't appreciate food science, but we want to work with people that are truly artists in their field and understand deliciousness, right? And understand the need to not put a bunch of crap in our food. right? So that's what Mel did. What we did is we did 100% whole wheat and 20% buckwheat. We can go up to 100% buckwheat. Buckwheat, remember, is high in lysine. Wheat and the other cereals are low in lysine. We're not developing wheat that's high in lysine. We're blending it with a crop that adds diversity to our field, diversity to our plates, diversity to our foods. That's a successful project. Those cookies were delicious. They had to be the right color, texture, shape, crunch, mouthfeel going in, mouthfeel finishing, salt, sugar, whatever. Everything had to be right. There's probably 14 parameters there that have to be right for that. You can't just say, here's a healthy cookie, right? I'm going to show some examples of 100% whole wheat bread products. These were mostly baked by Jeff Yankelo. In 2005, he went to Paris, France to compete in the Coupe du Monde de Boulangerie, which is that's it for bread. He was the first on the first American team to win the gold medal at the Coupe du Monde de Boulangerie. The French were seriously pissed. He can do that, right? That takes matching, that's a baguette. I would guess you would want to eat that. I want to eat that. That takes a baker that has the chutzpah to say, yeah, I can do it. Let me figure it out. Jeff was one of the most white bread people, white flour people ever. Now he won't be in the same room as it, right? Everything he does is 100% whole wheat. That takes the right variety as well. So it takes breeders working with chefs and bakers together to do something like that. This is a malted 100% whole wheat bread as well. These are all natural ferment, long ferment, so you're breaking down the phytic acid, you're making things nutritionally available. That's very delicious. The holy grail, of course, would be a croissant. This is 100% whole wheat croissant.
And it's the best croissant I've ever eaten.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah, and that's the truth. Okay, same thing. Jeff Yankelo made that. He made that in his home oven. There's not a lot of trickery to that. It's just the going through it. It took them about a year to perfect that. It's the right variety, and it's the right technique. There's no crap in that. That's 100% whole wheat croissant. It's highly nutritious. A question that we have then is, we can do these. This is Louis Prager from Prager Brothers down in San Diego. He's doing a whole wheat rye blend there. We have a display here. These breads are going for 12 to 14 bucks at a bakery. The question we had, the question that's asked of us, is how accessible and affordable and approachable is that to most members of our communities, right? All of us recognize these types of breads. We like a hard crust. We like things like that. We are giving breads to the food bank and the women's transition housing in our community, and we found out two things. Is one, it has to be sliced, right? So we bought a slicer. Number two, it has to be approachable and accessible. Affordable is another factor. But it needs to look like breads that people recognize, right? And in many cases, that's this. That's probably a little dark even there too. But a pan loaf that's soft, it's gonna, when you squish it, it feels fresh, right? Not through chemistry, but through true baking. That's an accessible style loaf there, and approachable as well. So it's a movement we're going on right now, is we still do these, and we'll do these all day long. These are kind of done, right? We can do very rustic, crusty loaves. We know that. We can do the baguettes and things like that as well. We're now working on alternatives that people would recognize as bread. Soft, plastic wrap, sliced. So it's a direction we're going right now. We're also working with a lot of home bakers. We're also working with the notion that we can bake at home. I started when I was 6. My Polish grandmother taught me how to cut up a chicken and how to bake rye bread and bagels and bread when I was 6 years old. She was a single mother with 4 kids. She cleaned houses for a living, and she baked bread every night. Okay, just saying that, right? This takes me 20 minutes to make. With organic ingredients, it's less than $1. 20 minutes of time I'm not on my phone. It takes a day and a half to do a full ferment and things like that. But everything that I am not on the phone with is less than 20 minutes. What we tell people is you can do that. We show them how to do that. We work in libraries, food banks, transition housing, schools, things like that. You can do that. You have to take the pressure off yourself as a home baker. It doesn't have to look perfect. Okay, it's going to be okay, is another way to say it, right? It's going to be okay. This small oven weighs about 18 kilos. It was bought for us by a community foundation to bring these accessible types of breads two situations. We go to women's transition housing, we go to libraries, we go to food banks and things like that. We bake right there on the sidewalk or inside. And this is what bread has to look like for certain facets of our community. It just has to. We can say it's a transition bread or say whatever we want, but I want to talk of the 20th century. That's Migrant Mother. This is a destitute Polish garment worker in New Jersey. These were taken, this was March of 33, this was June of 33. Dorothea Lange made art approachable, made grief and misery approachable to us as people. She showed the true brutality of agriculture. This is California agriculture during the Depression, and the true hope of a former destitute Polish garment worker in Brooklyn, relocated to New Jersey, and he's in a wheat field right there. So these are just a few months apart. She also said that beauty appears when one feels deeply, and I believe that very much. She took this shot of June of 1941, right before the war for the U.S. started. This is a Manna Colonies, which is a utopian colony. That's June of 41, Dorothea Lange photo. I went to that oven last month and took a picture of this woman, Doris Hahn. Her family bought that oven in 1923. She's been baking in that oven for 53 years. She's a one-person bakery. She starts work at midnight. She usually sells out by 10 in the morning. She does that 6 days a week by herself. That's that same oven that Dorothea Lange took the picture of. That's a 3 meter by 3 meter square brick oven. She does 200 loaves a night, usually. The loaves that she does are affordable and accessible and approachable for her community. I asked her what's going to happen when she stops baking. She said, I'm not. So, that peel right there is about 12 feet long, 4 meters tall. That's the sign for her bakery there. That oven was made in 1866. She's still using it. I want to talk now about accessible. I love working with wheat. I'm haunted by wheat. I have colleagues that work with lettuce. I don't know how you can get haunted by lettuce. I don't think Van Gogh or Chagall ever painted lettuce, right? So we can have access to our foods and our in this case wheat through art, right? And that's something that's very important for us to appreciate. We talked about art. We saw the art of seeds this morning at the conference. There's a lot of art in the jewelry, and the word beauty and art came up more in the past 3 days than you would normally hear at other conferences. I think we can all agree to that. This is about 3 meters by 1 meter by a little over a meter. This is 50 feet by 30 feet. That's a backdrop for Alecco, the ballet that Chagall did. There's two suns. There's a fish in that field. There's an upside down birch tree. Sort of typical Chagall stuff. This was taken from this. He painted this as viewing through his asylum window. This is November. This is June. That's what it looks like where we are most of the time. So when I look out the asylum of my office, I see the wheat that looks like that. I want to talk now about a different version of art, and that's placement of our food into the public setting. This is Tyrian Gardens in Copenhagen. 5 million people walk by that fountain each year. I wonder how many of them realize that a wheat anarchist planted spelt among the flowers. That's spelt right there, right? And throughout that planting, there's spelt, emmer, and a few other wheats in there. That's presenting our food out into society. I think it's very important. That's one way to do it. That's more of an anarchist way. Another way is right here at the Botanical Gardens. This was taken Friday. I don't know how many of you went on the tour of the gardens, but we have wheat in the gardens there, right? That's hellcorn, which was a weed for 4,000 years in Europe, interplanted in it, but this is right here a couple blocks away, right? In the Botanical Garden with 8,000 species, one of those is wheat. This is a Syrian wheat. This also was taken Friday, 2 days ago. This is a wheat from Syria. This is in Kalispell, Montana. This is in someone's front yard. That's placing wheat out in the public as well. This is Marin, north of San Francisco. Here's a traditional modern wheat. This is a modern landrace that we sent them. You see the variation. This elicits curiosity in terms of why do those look different and things like that. So here's what a landrace looks like. Here's what a modern wheat variety looks like. So probably 1,000 people stopped and looked at that wheat. It's an artist friend of ours just north of San Francisco. First Lady Michelle Obama planted wheat in the White House garden twice. And I'm not going to do any White House jokes or whatever. So, but what I will say is wheat was planted in the White House garden twice, from 1865 to today, and both times it was planted by First Lady Michelle Obama in the vegetable garden there. And what I will say is it's probably going to be a while before we get wheat back in the White House garden. And I'll stop there. But why did the First Lady plant wheat? Here's bread wheat, here's club wheat. Why would the First Lady plant wheat in the White House garden? Because it demonstrates our food, right? It draws attention to itself. It's out of place next to carrots and turnips and tomatoes. It's as out of place in the Botanical Garden it is in the White House garden there. And she did that 2 years in a row. That's putting wheat out there. That's using wheat as art. I now want to wrap up on the paths forward as we see it. So there's that. There's that. First one, and then I'll have sort of a summary slide. We develop modern open source land races in our program. We make these freely available. We have tremendous variation left in the field. This is what we do. This is Lexi Roach. When she was 12 years old, her grandfather came to us and he said, I want Lexi to take over the farm. He said, I'm getting older and I want her and her younger sister to take over the farm. What should I do? They farm 15,000 acres. So a little over 6,000 hectares. I said, why doesn't she develop her own wheat variety? Just breed some wheat, what the hell? So she came to the greenhouse, she made a cross. She then harvested that cross. She was in 7th grade at that time. She planted it out with her grandfather, a strip of it about the size of this stage here. Every year they'd go through it and they'd take out the plants they don't like. Very simple. Take a weed eater, I don't like that one. And we just said, they said, how do we do it? We said, just do it. She then went to high school. She got a Regents Gold Scholarship at my university, which is $180,000 based on that project. All of her schooling was paid. She kept developing the variety. She had one that she liked, and she said, what should I call it? She asked us that, what should I call it? We said that one of the best parts of being a wheat breeder is you get to name the variety, so name it whatever you want. So she named it Lexi 2. So she liked that better. All of them are called Lexi, 1 through 3, but she liked Lexi 2 the best. That variety now is grown on about 15,000 acres. That variety beat varieties from Syngenta, Monsanto, my program, Oregon State, University of Idaho, University of California, Davis. It's not that tough to breed a variety of wheat, right? Next year, she's taking over the farm. Okay, that's pretty cool. Okay, so here's some of the summary that I had from our own program, but also the general symposium. And that's, I don't know why I put pasta there, but I just like that picture. So that's 100% whole wheat pasta with some blue wheat in as well, and it's delicious. I just want to go through these quickly, but I think the best use of our land is to use all the wheat, right? Not to use 30% and make peat pots for pot plants or for hog feed or whatever, right? If we're going to grow hog feed, we can grow hog feed more efficiently. We put hogs out on pasture. We can do things other than dump what we consider waste in our food to hogs, right? It's not waste. Everything we want in our wheat is there. We can bake with it. We just have to say yes. We need to add more water, right? If you're a baker, you just add more water to it, right? And you're going to get it, right? You can do it. Those pictures that I showed you showed that you can do it. If I can do it at home, we can all, everyone in this room can do it. So I think the best use of our land is use all the wheat, right? And I'll get to this 9 billion stuff in a minute too, right? And it relates back to that. We need to add time back as an ingredient in our food and in our lives. We've removed time as an ingredient. That's where our hyper-efficiency comes in. That's why we're in the place we're in right now with our food system, right? Time is money. No, time is good, right? Time allows flavors to develop. Time allows the nutritional value to become greater in our foods. Fermentation takes time, is another way to say it. I'm a big believer in adding time back as an ingredient in our foods, in our kitchens, in our bakeries, in our lives. Add diversity back into our crops. We don't do monoculture stuff, right? The newest variety that we develop probably has 10,000 different wheats in it. This fact that we don't have enough diversity that's the myth. There's plenty of diversity. I can make 1,000 crosses and develop 1 million different wheats in a year. So the diversity is there. We want to capture important diversity from our past, but also we can develop the hell out of it, right? I believe we should re-decentralize what we do, right? We maybe don't need 25,000 flour mills back, but we need something back, right? Our communities lost a lot when we lost that, and we lost a lot more than just flour mills. But a re-decentralization, we get the questions all the time. We get it from Bill Gates and others. How are you going to scale it up? That's really cool what you're doing, but how are you going to scale it up? We don't want to scale up, we want to scale down. And we want to replicate. We do models that are replicable. We think is really important in our systems. 10% of public plant breeders are women. Okay, that's a fact, right? So how's that going, right? It's not going well. It's not changing. And that number's been there for a long time, right? It has. I have a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a PhD degree. I realized a few years ago that in all that college and all that learning and all those classrooms, I had one woman professor. One. Bachelor's, master's, and PhD. You kidding me? And I didn't know that. I didn't appreciate that. I do now, but I didn't, right? We need to increase our efforts to be inclusive. And however you define being inclusive, I think is important. We need to embrace deliciousness and embrace beauty in what we do, what we see every day, what we see out the window, what we see in our plates, in our kitchens, in our bakery. I think placing our crops as art, seed as art as well, any way that we can do our art. What is our art? It could be music, it could be visual arts, it could be moving, whatever it is, right? Poetry, whatever. Just let's bring some art back, for God's sakes, into what we do. I believe we should increase yield responsibly, right? So what I mean by that is we don't need biotech, we don't need GMOs to fix things, right? And to sell it based on 9 billion people coming whenever they're coming, to me is a little crass, right? To sell a technology based on this point in the future, 2050, we're going to have 9 billion people to feed. Okay, about 20,000 people died of food-based misery today, and yesterday, and tomorrow, and every day of this year, right? So first of all, why are we waiting to 2050, right? If we're really worried about it, let's do something now, right? Food-based misery is not a production issue. It's economics, politics, and infrastructure. It's very simple, right? The UN will tell us, they tell us that 18,000 to 20,000 people died on average of food-based misery. They also tell us that we have 1.5 times the calories we need today to feed all those people perfectly. So of all the people on the planet today, we have 1.5 times the calories we need to feed them. Why do we not? Because of lack of desire to actually do it, because of politics, economics, infrastructure, and all the complications that come with that, right? We waste 25 to 50% of the food on the planet in a developing country or developed, right? Let's fix that one too, right? That takes infrastructure. That takes a willingness to want to do that. Do we want to do it? I don't know. In the US, we have 20 million acres of front lawn. Are we worried about food-based misery? Take out the front lawn and put in cabbage and potatoes, right? Or don't talk about it, right? I never said I was going to feed the world, right? I'm feeding my region and helping other people out. No patents on life. Seeds are life, right? Seeds are alive, right? 1995, we said we're GMO free in my program. because of the patenting, the locking down of life. And that's where the danger in diversity comes from, is locking everything up through intellectual properties. It's generating new variation, but not making it possible. And that came out in the talks, too, over the past few days. Naomi mentioned that affordable need not be a race to the bottom. So when we talk about affordable, accessible, and approachable bread, we're working with Mel Derbyshire and others to work on the economics of that, of how low can a bread be and everyone makes a living wage throughout that process. The people cleaning the bakery, the bakers, the delivery people, all the way through the system, what is that loaf of bread going to cost, right? What we do know is in our food system in the States is you can buy a chicken for $5 or $6 in the grocery store, a full chicken chilled and wrapped in a plastic bag. That is not possible. That is not possible unless you mistreat the animals, the environment, and the workers that produce that chicken. It's not possible. It's just not. What is the price? We don't know, right? And I'll end it just by saying seed matters. So thank you.